McCain-O'S Hill.
Good enough. Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to introduce an amendment to Bill 21, an Act to protect patients. It replaces the 5-year ban from reinstatement upon finding of sexual assault by a professional with a lifetime ban. And I'll wait for the amendment to circulate.
This will be Amendment A1.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Honourable Member.
Thanks. I move that Bill 21, an Act to protect patients, be amended in Section 7B in the proposed Section 45 as follows. A. In the subsection 3, by striking out until at least 5 years have elapsed from the date that the decision of unprofessional conduct was made by the hearing tribunal. B. In subsection 4, 1, by striking out Section 96(2)(a) and substituting Section 92(1)(a), and 2, by striking out until at least 5 years have elapsed from the date that the decision of unprofessional conduct was originally made by the governing body of a similar profession in that other jurisdiction. C, by striking out subsection 5. In short, this amendment modifies the proposed Section 7. If passed, the amendment will eliminate the ability of a professional who has been found by their college to have sexually assaulted a patient to reapply to practice in Alberta. I truly believe our job as elected representatives is to be the voice of people who might not be able to speak up, and survivors of sexual assault by medical professionals should be assured unequivocally that the person who offended against them will have no opportunity to assault someone else in those circumstances again. A health professional who abuses their position of trust to assault a patient has lost their privilege to practice. Being able to apply to return to practice after 5 years is not enough. Sexual assault is always an act of exerting power over another person. It's an act of violence that uses sex as a weapon, and we should let survivors know in no uncertain terms that we stand with them. They should be confident in the knowledge that we will not allow anyone else to face the same awful circumstances they had to endure, that the perpetrator of the crime against them will not be empowered to offend in those circumstances again. According to the Criminal Code of Canada, voyeurism earns a 5-year sentence. A person who violates their trust to commit a sex crime against a young person faces up to 14 years of prison time. A person who commits sexual assault can be sentenced up to 14 years. Some might say that a lifetime ban on practicing in Alberta is unreasonable for harming a patient for a lifetime. Now, the purpose of sanctions in the criminal justice system are punishment, deterrence, rehabilitation, protection, and denunciation. And I've had some conversations with people who believe that because we value rehabilitation in our justice system, practitioners should be allowed to reapply for a license after 5 years. I assert that anyone convicted of a sexual assault while holding a position of power over a patient is welcome to demonstrate their rehabilitation outside of the auspices of their prior profession. By all means, pursue a career in research, a position in a new career, and show that you are rehabilitated in other ways. Earlier in October, former Canadian Olympic sprinter Desi Williams received a lifetime ban by Athletics Canada for violating the organization's sexual harassment policy for his actions in 2010. Without trivializing the impacts of sexual harassment, the athlete received a lifetime ban for sexual harassment. The bill before us provides only a 5-year ban for the far more severe action of sexual assault. In 2014, when the Minister of Education revoked the licenses of teachers who had sexual intercourse with a student or sexual conversations, the Teachers Union accused the Minister of playing political games because the ATA had only recommended the suspensions. So we have a precedence for refusing those convicted of sexual assault from working in their previous field again. And we have the knowledge of I find this difficult to talk about. We have the knowledge that survivors of sexual assault have already endured enough. I really urge everyone to show our solidarity with survivors, and please support this compassionate amendment.
Members wishing to speak to the amendment. Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the member for the proposed amendment. I'm going to take this opportunity because it directly relates to speak in response to one of the questions raised by the member for Chestermere Rocky View, and that was under what threshold would it be determined if a professional should have the ability to practice again once their practice permit's been cancelled, because I think it does directly relate to this proposed amendment. So under the current draft of the legislation, if a practice permit has been cancelled, a health professional could not apply to the regulatory college for at least 5 years. It is in no way a guarantee that after 5 years a practice permit would be reinstated. I also want to clarify that if at the 5-year mark they apply and are not granted reinstatement, that there's a 6-month period between applications to apply again for reinstatement. So if you apply at 5 years, you could apply at 5.5 and 6 and so forth. But there again would be no guarantee. And even at 5, that is the minimum standard that a permit would be removed for sexual assault. So I want to just reinforce that. Regulatory colleges would be required to assess the application for reinstatement in accordance with the criteria set out in the Health Professions Act as well as in the professional regulation. And such criteria generally includes assessing evidence of good character, considering the record of the hearing at which the applicant's registration and practice permit were cancelled, whether the member is fit to practice, and whether the individual has met the conditions imposed on the individual before the registration and practice permit were cancelled. So I do just really want to reinforce that, like the member moving the amendment, we have no tolerance for inappropriate conduct, sexual abuse or sexual misconduct, and in no way would be regardless of this amendment, consenting to that in any way or endorsing that in any way. I do want to say that we looked at other interjurisdictional comparisons, and as was stated in second reading, the only other jurisdiction to have a requirement is Ontario, and it is 5 years. So if we were to go to a permanent withdrawal, we would definitely be outliers. Even doing this, we're already being leaders in the country by bringing in this clause and the mandatory minimum of 5 years. But I do want members to consider that. And I have to say, in the work that I've embarked on with the various colleges over the last 6 months, they have been very cooperative, and I'm glad, because I think they, like all of us, know that any time that sacred trust in a health professional is breached, that it is damaging to that individual long-term, and also to the profession and the trust that folks have in that profession. So I have to say, in working with the colleges and with working with other jurisdictions and doing the interjurisdictional comparison, I think we've landed on the right spot. And I do want to just reinforce that a mandatory minimum of 5 years in no way assures folks that if anyone is a risk to the public, that they would get their license back after 5 years, that the mandatory minimum would be 5. So I just really want to reinforce that. And with that being stated, I think I am inclined to vote against the amendment for that purpose. I think that the mandatory minimum is outlined in this legislation, not propose that it be stricken permanently forever. Again, there is the possibility that that could happen even by having a mandatory minimum of 5 based on the circumstances with which are being considered. So for those reasons, I'll be voting against the proposed amendment, but also wanted to give the opportunity to respond to at least one of the questions raised by the official opposition earlier, and I'll respond to the rest at another opportunity in committee. Thank you.
Any other speakers to the amendment? Calgary McCain-O's Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for her comments. And I will just reiterate that it's important for us to stand unequivocally beside survivors of sexual assault. And this is a very clear demonstration of our support by saying to them, no, we won't stand for what happened to you, and the person that perpetrated, they will not have the opportunity to be able to offend in those same circumstances again. They won't be able to sexually assault someone that is coming to them for help. And we can do that by passing this amendment. We can do that by saying across the board, across the province, we will not allow a medical professional, regardless of their college, to reapply to be a part of that profession again. I think it's important that we do that. I think we have waited so long to even acknowledge that survivors are there, and we have the opportunity to be really clear and to be outstanding leaders in this aspect. Society says that we don't tolerate sexual assault. Let's demonstrate that through the legislation.
Any other members speaking to the amendment? I'll first recognize Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very difficult topic. Obviously, having been a practitioner for 25 years, this is close to my heart. Important positions of trust, respect, training, ethical duty. This doesn't only apply to physicians, of course. There are some 40 different professionals, I think, involved in this. So it involves quite a large sector of the population, and I'm very sensitive to the issues that the member raises in terms of recognizing the tremendous suffering and impact on a victim of sexual harassment, assault, and various levels of misconduct. These are all degrees of injury, and where one draws the line and where one examines the circumstances around which that occurred and whether there were extenuating circumstances in that professional's life that may or may not identify different approaches to the penalties, the consequences for whatever acts were committed is important. But I also recognize that we're in a society that, for good reason, is equally focused on rehabilitating criminals, rehabilitating people who make mistakes, rehabilitating people who got into trouble for various reasons, some of them mental health related, some of them addictions related, some of them deliberate self-aggrandizement and selfish motives. There are all these ranges of motives for doing bad things to people and bad things to property. But we, I think, rightfully have moved to a point in our society where restoration and rehabilitation, rather than punishment, is also valued. And so when I think about the thousands of dental hygienists, occupational therapists, physios, and forcing them out of their profession simply because of, not simply, but because of an egregious violation of a patient, is a step too far for me. I think we need to recognize victim rights and rehabilitate, or perhaps compensate, I should say, and provide all the supports possible to the victims for whatever duration is necessary, at the expense of that college that may or may not have been involved, or at the expense of that individual who perpetrated the insult. But to ban them for life is not, to me, an appropriate recognition of the fact that we are humans. We do bad things at times or make mistakes at times because of a variety of issues that are going on in life. And I feel very strongly that punishment has been too big a part of our culture as opposed to rehabilitation of people who do make mistakes. So I share with the Minister concern that this is going a step too far. Other jurisdictions in Canada, I guess, have also sustained the fact that there's a minimum penalty required, and 5 years is a pretty significant impact on both your level of training and your loss of income. And we're in a permanent disqualification. You're removing somebody whom we've invested probably $100,000 in education and training from work that is needed in our society. And if they demonstrate appropriate, I think, penance and do appropriate rehabilitation, and they are judged by their peers and others, perhaps, maybe there should be an independent council that reviews those individuals after a period of penalty and removal from their profession. Certainly there should be a very critical look at their appropriateness, and then restrictions on their practice. Can they be ever practicing alone without another person present? Can they ever deal with women of a certain age? Should they be restricted from dealing with children? Should they be restricted from dealing with particular medical problems, like gynecological and those sorts of problems, if there is reason to believe that they are not able to do those in good trust? And I guess those are the kind of judgments, and I would call them appropriate limits based on evidence, based on what the individuals are demonstrating in terms of their remorse and their ability to change. So I can't support this amendment either. Reluctantly, I think I feel passionately for the victims of these offenses as well, but I also believe very strongly in restorative justice, not in lifelong punitive actions of authorities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Calgary McKenna's Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple more comments. I would disagree with the member from Calgary Mountain View. We should not be equally focused on the perpetrator and the victim of this kind of a crime. There are circumstances where we should just demonstrate complete rejection of somebody's behavior, and this is one of those circumstances. Restoration. What about the victim in terms of restoration? Have we spoken to survivors of sexual assault to say, hey, are you okay with that doctor going and practicing again and having the opportunity to offend against someone else, even though he's been to prison and people say that, you know, he's rehabilitated and he's awfully sorry for what he did to you? I don't agree. I don't abide by that at all. I don't think it's fair to survivors of sexual assault to expect them to just swallow their pride and accept that the person that perpetrated against them is allowed to even apply for a license to do the same sort of profession again. It's as though we're saying, you know, we hear what happened to you, but it isn't as important as what is happening to this person that perpetrated against you. So we're going to give them some more privileges that we could take away, but we've decided that we're not going to take those away, that they've earned them somehow. It just seems really backwards to me. And when we have the opportunity to be able to say to victims very clearly, we believe you, and we think what you have to say is important, and we're doing whatever we can to make sure that it doesn't happen to anyone else again, we have that responsibility.
Any other members wishing to speak to the amendment? Seeing none, you're ready for the vote? All those in favour of Amendment A1 to Bill 21, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. No. That amendment is defeated. Any further questions, comments? We have a division.